Okay.
Welcome everyone to Horticulture Corner Bonsai with Joshua Brown of the North Florida Bonsai Club. I want to welcome you all to the Garden Club for our 100th anniversary year. We're celebrating all year long our 100th anniversary. And if you haven't seen the new banners out front, go take a look and get your picture taken with them. They're beautiful. My name is Denise Reagan. I'm the Executive Director at the Garden Club, and I'm here with my colleague, Daniel Stark, our Operations Manager. And we are happy to be here, and we want to thank the Jessie Ball DuPont Fund for a generous grant that allows us to do hybrid programs just like this one. I'd like to thank our Horticulture Corner Chair, Wally Eriks, who normally would be checking you in, but could not be here today. I'd also like to promote the next Horticulture Corner program, River Friendly Yards, with Charles Gooden of Johnny Appleseed Organic. It's going to be a great program, and that is on June 7th. So mark your calendars. If you are really concerned about the health of the river, as well as the health of your yard, this is a great opportunity for you to find out some great techniques to make sure you satisfy both of those issues. If you're not a member of the Garden Club of Jacksonville, it's a good time to join. It's always a good time to join the Garden Club. If you have questions about that, you can see me or Daniel or Tiffany, and we'd be happy to talk to you about membership. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker for the day. Joshua Brown saw his very first bonsai in the early 2000s and signed up for a class almost immediately. A hobby quickly progressed to a passion when he moved to Florida 15 years ago. He has since held every board position within the North Florida Bonsai Club, had trees exhibited in multiple state conventions, and had a tree displayed at the Epcot Flower and Garden Festival. He specializes in deciduous and broadleaf trees with more than 200 bonsai in his personal collection. That's pretty amazing. Yep. All right, if you have questions for Josh, please, if you're on Zoom, put them in the chat so that we can pose them to him. And if you're here in the audience, we have a microphone that we'd love to have you use so we can capture it in the recording. You can, if you can, keep them until the end, but there may be a couple times throughout the program where he may ask you to ask questions. Cool. All right, and with that, Josh, take it away.
Okay, perfect. Well, Denise already kind of set the stage of who I am or why I did this. I threw a picture in the beginning of the presentation. I actually have a tree at Epcot right now. So Epcot does a flower and garden show every spring from March till July. So that's my loropetalum that's there, full flower. It's a beautiful tree. Was wonderful putting it out on display and get about 2 million people to view the bonsai trees down there. So that's always fun. So that's kind of one way to set bona fides. The other ones, I figured I'd actually bring in trees to show you to say like, hey, they look nice, and hopefully gives you some comfort that I know what I'm talking about. I do not know everything. I know that much. But I always try and learn more, and there's a lot of courses that I'm still taking to kind of refresh and learn more. I'm actually going to a class tomorrow for a 2-day class down in the Ocala. So it's a continuous learning thing. That's what I kind of like about it, is you never know all of it, and you never know all of the species or the care or kind of how to do it. Yeah, so we can flip over to the next. So the biggest thing, the biggest misconception with bonsai is that it's a species of tree. So people picture a pine, a juniper, what you saw in the Karate Kid or other movies, and they say, oh, that's a bonsai tree. It's not the species, it's the technique. So the technique is a tree in a tray. So it's miniaturizing a tree, putting it in a container, and then people go, well, that just looks just like a maple I saw in nature, or a big tropical that I saw down in South Florida. So that's the goal, is everything in perspective, just small. So it's tiny trees. So that representation of nature and miniature also gets misconstrued. Of people think that I took the tree that's meant to be 40 feet tall, and by starving it of nutrients and shoving it in a tiny pot and putting wire on it, that I've tortured it and kept it small. Not the case. These trees are pampered and preened and everything else. I mean, they're like your show dogs. Like you want them to be in optimal health when you put them out on display. Everything is kind of critiqued and judged, and the horticulture always comes first, because if a tree's dead, it's not pretty. So you want to make sure it's healthy at all times. Just like any other plant that helps it resist pests, disease, everything else is premier health. So they get fertilized regularly, they get repotted whenever they're needed, 1, 2, 4 years, kind of depends on the tree. The only really care guide that's significantly different between bonsai and regular horticulture is it gets watered more. So it's in a small pot, it's going to use up that water. It's got, a lot of leaves for a very tiny pot, so it's going to transpire, it's going to lose moisture. So these get watered in the summer every day. Sometimes if it's really hot or really dry, twice a day, if I can. But I did mean to ask, how many people either have a bonsai tree now or have had one in the past, just as a level set? Okay, so some. So everyone who's had a tree has probably killed a tree. I have killed quite a few. That's part of the learning curve. It's very unfortunate, but it happens. So I meet a lot of people and they'll go, oh yeah, I had one of those 10 years ago, it died. And like, that's the end of the journey. If that was the end, I would have stopped in the early 2000s when I killed my first couple. I had my little 8-foot bench in front of a window, and I think last I checked, 2 of those trees are still alive. All the rest of them are gone. So, but the hope is each time you do this, you learn from a mistake and say, okay, well, that is something I won't do again. And I can now, have the tree grow longer, more mature, and do more. So, okay, so what trees can you make into a bonsai? So we mentioned it's not a species, it's a technique. So anything with a woody stem can become a bonsai. We just need it to be able to kind of keep upright on its own. So I like trees like elms, maples. This is a ficus, so a lot of tropical broadleaves can be used, but you can use shrubs. At the beginning of my presentation, I had a boxwood, podocarpus, loropetalums, all those are shrub or tree forms. You can use herbs. I saw a beautiful rosemary bonsai at the national show. It was right in front of the door. It was in full flower, smelled amazing. Even in a room full of bonsai people, it caught a lot of people's attention because it's like, that's a rosemary. Everybody immediately knew what it was. So you can use vining trees, flowering trees, anything that you like and enjoy. You just apply the techniques, learn how to care for that specific tree and grow it. So a lot of people focus on specific species and they say, well, I like this. If you saw the table going in, I like elms. I have a lot of elms. They're fun, they're easy, and just kind of, they work well in my environment, my yard. So coming to a garden presentation, my assumption is even if you guys haven't done bonsai, you know general horticulture. So you understand how to keep things alive, or you've practiced and grown plants and things. So that's half the battle. Step 1 is keep it alive. Step 2 is make it look cool. That's really only 2 things that you're doing. So the horticulture is the baseline. Like I said, if it's dead or sick, it won't look cool. Then the next piece is the artistic element. So people get into it for 2 reasons. They either like horticulture and they like plants and they think that looks neat. Some people really like art and they say, well, this is a different artistic medium that I can use and apply my skills to. And then they have to learn the horticulture. It tends to be more of the first, people who like plants and then apply the art, but there are both. And what's interesting about it as an artistic medium is if you paint a painting or you make a sculpture, you paint it, it dries. Not every artist, but for the most part, it's done. Like most artists would say, I'm done, I'm going to sell this. Now there's some artists who are always iterative and they never think it's done. With a bonsai, it's alive, it's growing, it's changing, you're pruning it. I had this sitting on my desk today and realized there was wire on it that I forgot I put on in the winter that I had to take off. So like the trees are always growing, even if you don't see it or don't notice it. And if you'll flip to the next. So these 4 pictures, I don't know how well they'll show up for everyone here in the audience, but these are all pictures of this tree over the last, let's see, since January 2011. So the last 11 years for this tree. So when I'm selecting a tree or when you're starting out, you're trying to identify just a basic structure. You're saying, okay, where am I going to start? Because you're either going to go to a nursery or start with a bush or a shrub and say, what's step 1? So you flip forward and then I'll have you pop back on. Or go one more. So yeah, so this one, when we're trying to set up a tree, we're saying we're going to define the line base to tip, so bottom to top, and we're going to set up a concept for what do I want this tree to look like. So it's a tree, draw inference from nature, go out, walk the river, look at windswept trees, walk through a forested preserve, look at things that are slanting, leaning for light. I mean, I grew up in Illinois in the Midwest. You see cow pastures and you see a big maple right in the middle. Big, huge dome. That's my reference for a tree. So everyone has a different reference. You know, there's live oaks, there's maple. So you kind of say, I like this form. I'm going to make a tree to look like that form. So that's when you start with a tree that fits your vision and say, okay, well, I'm going to take away what doesn't work. So it's addition by subtraction. I'm going to take off branches. I'm going to set a line to make it simple and to start. And then will you go backwards one for me? So then once I've set a line and I've got a basic concept, I'm going to let it grow out, let it get full. And then I'm going to say, okay, now I've got a bunch to work with, similar to this. Now what am I going to do with it? And I can pick 2 paths. I can either get some wire and I can wire it out. And what I'm doing when I'm wiring is I'm saying when a tree is young, it's going to grow up towards the sky and everything's going to shoot for light. So that looks juvenile because it is. That's what trees do, is they grow as high as they can. The hormones are trying to outcompete everything else and get towards the light. So then I take that apical growth and I bend it down and say, okay, well now I want you to look like the weight of gravity has acted on you for years. You're a big old live oak and everything is pulled down. So we put the wire on and we manipulate that branch down. What happens is on the top of that branch and the bottom, it will put small fractures throughout the bark. Not enough to like get through the cambium layer, but it'll just injure the tissue when you've wired it and put it in position. So then you leave it there and the tree says, oh, well, I've got a wound. I've got to heal my skin. So it'll put new bark, new tissue on. And you'll notice that the wire will start to cut in. Well, the wire hasn't moved, the tree's grown into it. So now you take the wire off and it's like a splint. The bone healed and says, okay, well, I'm not up here anymore, I'm down here. So now you set structure on those branches. Sometimes, Denise and I were talking about this when we started, sometimes the branch says, yeah, that's great. You want to be down here, I'm going to be kind of in the middle. Like I didn't want to go that far. So you say, okay, well, I took the wire off. Now I'm going to do my Daniel-san and I'm going to put the wire back on and do it again. So that's what wiring is about. Some people do not like to wire, so they'll just say, I'm going to select and clip and grow, like a hedge pruning, or pick which direction I want the tree to go. I've got 2 buds. I'm going to cut to the bud that'll grow that way. So you kind of get a zigzaggy pattern. Both are perfectly acceptable. Both are normal techniques. It's just what people like and what look you're going for. A wired tree, you can get there faster. It can sometimes look more artificial because it's more hand of man. A clip and grow tree is much more natural. It's softer, it takes longer, but the tree has done all the work. So again, it's personal preference, it's artistic preference, but both of them can make a beautiful bonsai tree. So we flip forward. Okay, one more. So this is kind of setting that structure, wiring it out, making it, positioning the branches to where we're going to use them. So now we've set primary line, we've set secondary line by setting our branches, and then go one more forward. And then we say, okay, well now we've got the rough outline of a tree. Now we're going to really start applying some more refined artistic concepts. So our artistic principles that we use the most are like rule of thirds. So if anyone paints or does photography, you'd say, okay, I'm going to split my vision here into 3 pieces, quadrants up and down, side to side, and then pick where I'm going to put my subject in that quadrant. Well, same thing for a bonsai. My pot is my frame. Where do I want it in the pot? Left or right of center, as well as where do I want foliage? So my foliage is me setting the subject and putting it where I want it. So each piece of the tree has thirds. So my lower third is typically dedicated to my trunk. So that's where I want to see big, beefy, strong piece of material. It typically melts or feathers into the ground. It looks like it's strongly anchored in the pot. It gives it the look of that old tree, because as trees age, they continue to kind of grow and swell out of the ground, and you'll see all these roots and everything, especially prominent in tropical trees or tropical environments where these big ficus get these long fluted trunks and roots and really grow out. So this lower third, really up to this first main branch, that's my trunk section. My middle third is typically for branching. So that's where I'm really setting, again, what the kind of main structure or look of the tree will be. And then my top third is my apex. It's my top, the top. So you just, at that point, are saying what matches with branching. It might be a rounded shape. It might be a more triangular shape. This is where you can play with, do I like symmetry and I want it all to match? Do I like asymmetry and I want to push a lot of, like this one's more asymmetrical. There's a lot more foliage to the left side, which shows off the fact that there's a rock over here. So that was done intentionally to push more visual mass over there. So what I want to do is I want to start your eye somewhere around the base of the tree. I want you to follow it up the tree to points that I think are interesting. If there's something that I don't find interesting, I don't know if this will show up well on camera, but I'll show you guys later as well. There's a big wound right in the middle of this tree where I cut it off. So it's a big bullseye. This one might show up better. There's another one here. So when you turn the tree to the front, which I've chosen this as the front, you don't see that big bullseye. It's not distracting. You just see the taper of the tree. So we highlight characteristics that we like the taper and the movement, and we hide characteristics that we don't. So you can either hide it, again, with foliage, you can hide it by turning trees. That's where the artistry comes in. Now, by trade, I'm an accountant, so I'm not particularly artistic. I do numbers, but I can learn. So over time, I just find things that work or that are neat. There's a lot of people who are much more artistic and creative than I am, and they come up with all these like really ingenious ways to do it. And then I go, okay, I'll copy that. That's a really good idea. So it's like everything else. So, I think I lost slides on here. Oh, sorry. So then go forward for me a little bit, Denise. Okay, so then I touched on this at the beginning, but once you have your material and you decide, hey, this is a tree I want to work with, then your design concept is as varied as nature. You can go around anywhere, like I said, go around nature, look at things that interest you and say, that's the concept that I'm going to follow. So we've talked about some of these. Some of them are a little bit more obscure and more man-made or contrived, like these exposed root forms. It's really like, hey, a seedling fell on a stump. It grew over the stump and enveloped the stump, and then the stump brought it out. So it's got these long roots with a tree up here. We see that out west. You don't really see it here in the Western mountains. You'll see that. We don't really see it as much here on the East Coast. So again, is what your point of reference is as to what you like and what you do. So I selected a few of the bonsai styles that I kind of personally gravitate towards to highlight tonight, but just know that there's a wide variety. If you Google it, look it up, there is, you got your informal upright, your miyogi, you got your root over rock. There's, names for them all the Japanese names, all the American names. You can go nuts on that. So, one more. So raft, and apologies, I ran out of hands this morning, so I was going to bring a raft too to go with these, but there's just too many things to carry to work. So a raft is in essence a tree that fell over. So something happened to it. In this case, the tree on the right is a tree we saw in Nashville. It was growing over a waterway. the roots underneath, the water had kind of softened the ground and it started to lean, and it kept leaning. It obviously had been leaning for years because all the branches that were in a dome this way are now here, and what were once branches now became new trunks. So there's all these trunks popping up out of the side of the tree, so there's now no foliage under here, and everything's growing up. So it's a neat way to say, I'm going to mimic like a forest or a row of smaller trees, but it's all coming from one root system. It's all one tree that fell over. And then the other tree kind of there in the middle of the view is a gentleman in England who had developed that tree. And again, it was a piece of material that didn't have branching on one side, was kind of uninteresting, and they laid it on its side and goes, oh, well, now this is really cool. This, what was a flaw, now became my feature. When I turn it up and let it develop, now I've got all these interesting trunks. So each one of those trunks becomes part of the whole composition that, you know, then becomes a tree. What other one? So root over rock, that's a little more applicable to us. So we're in kind of a subtropical environment. These you see a lot in tropical, subtropical environments. The tree engulfing a building. So that's Angkor Wat, that's Cambodia. They have whole temples that ficus trees have basically swallowed the buildings over time. It's just a seedling deposited by a bird, moved there by an animal, moved there by the wind. It sits there, you know, it grows as a tiny little tree. Over time, those roots of the strangler figs just engulf it. So that's a really neat look and a good thing to do. Now you say in a bonsai pot, how do you manufacture that or create that? Well, you take your gutter, and you cut a piece of your gutter off and you stick it in there, and you put a seedling in the top of a gutter, and it looks ludicrous because you've got a little seedling in a 4-foot long gutter, and you leave it in there for about 2 years, and then it grows 3-foot long roots on this little bitty seedling. So then you say, okay, now I've got basically a ponytail of roots. I'm going to go drape that over a rock, tie it in, and I'm going to bury the whole thing back in the ground and ignore it for another 2 years. And then I'll go look at it and hope I did it right the first time and start exposing it and see how those roots have then grown and expanded and grown and into the nooks and crannies of that rock. So that's this tree. So this is about a 5 to 7 year project from a seedling grown over a rock. And when I'm done, everybody can kind of come see and look at it. It's harder to see, but parts of the seedling, I planted them in between the crevices of the rock, and it's starting to kind of melt and flow around the edges of the rock now, and really grab on. So you get to a point where they will never be separate again. Like that tree is on that rock. If I want to take it off, I got to chisel the rock out. It's not coming out. You can do it with older trees and try and lay the roots over, but there'll always be a gap. So it's best done with young trees and really developed over time. But those root over rock are kind of a neat thing. One of the gentlemen who was really a role model to me in the club here in Jacksonville had done a lot of these projects and showed me what he had done. After he passed, I own one of his trees. And so that's kind of an homage to someone who taught me, was using his techniques and saying, oh, well, now I want to do it and see if I can create a tree as nice as the one of his that I own. So we talked raft, we talked root over rock, and what was the last of the features that I discussed? Oh, flat top. So the flat top is Louisiana Bayou at its best. So big, beefy cypress trees out in the swamp. A storm hits it, wind hits it, whatever. It says, I got to the top, the height that I want, and my top broke off. So then what happens, rather than grow a new top, the tree kind of says, hey, that maybe wasn't a good idea, and it grows out. So it grows these really, it's not quite a linear plane, but it's pretty darn close. So if you look out there, everything is the same height. Part of it is an environmental adaptation because the tallest trees get knocked over and blown down. And if they flatten out, then they don't get as much wind force. So these trees have large buttress base to hold them in the ground. And then these broad canopies, again, to outcompete other plants and shade them out, as well as to kind of get as much sun as they can. So we mimic those flat tops, typically using species that fit. So like cypress make great flat tops. A lot of the other broadleaf conifers, they'll do some with redwoods and things that are very ancient, long-lived trees. And then the tree that I'm standing next to, that was the first one that I had accepted into Epcot. So that was my representation of a flat top in that form. So, and bonsai can be all sizes. They can be the tiny things, you know, the little 5 to 7 inch, 9 inch, whatever, holding in your hand bonsai. They can be these, which would still be considered kind of like one hand trees. They can get up to imperial size, where it takes 4 large gentlemen to lift them and move them around. A lot of bonsai nurseries employ dingoes, which are small forklifts that they drive around the nursery and lift trees with that because they're just too heavy. So most people envision them being very, very small, and they can be, but there's no limit to the size. As long as it's containerized in a pot, it's all in perspective, all in you know, your nature and miniature, I think I mentioned this earlier, but kind of 1 to 6. So we're going to take a tree and say we're going to break it into either 6 or 12ths, and that's our proportion as we shrink it to make it look natural. Again, this is the accountant in me. I memorized the numbers. I know the numbers work. I don't know the why necessarily for that one to say why is 1 to 6, a range of 1 to 6 to 1 to 12. If you measure it and either shrink it or bring it down, it will look natural. If you get outside that range, either too small or too big, you can just tell it with your eye that it doesn't look right. I wish I knew why it doesn't look right, but I can't pinpoint it. Like when you smush it and make this little Hershey Kiss sumo tree with a sprig of foliage, it looks wrong. It kind of looks like a Hershey Kiss or a, you know, dog present or something left on your lawn. If you get too big or too tall, it just looks lanky and rangy, and it, you know, kind of like me, you just keep stretching and get too tall. So that proportional piece is what makes them look like bonsai trees. So, and I think those are the main things that I had for style. So we started with this at the beginning, and I'll bring it back at the end. If you decide to practice or try it, you will kill a tree. I almost guarantee it. I don't want to say it, but just know that it's probably going to happen. There's a lot of species, there's a lot of techniques that are somewhat aggressive. So if you say, hey, I'm going to put it into a pot, I'm going to remove roots in stages, but at some point you're taking a fair amount of roots off. It's going to stress the tree. You want to make sure it's very healthy. You're doing it at the right time of year. Those are the kind of things you have to kind of learn. What is the right time of the year? This one's summer, this one's spring. There's others that are winter. It's just, again, the species, what they like, when they're at their optimum health, and when they've kind of accumulated all those energies, all the sugars and starches, and where they put them. So a deciduous tree is going to, you know, accumulate sugars and starches through its solar panels up here. It's going to store it in the trunks and store it in the roots. So if you cut off all those roots in the winter, it goes, hey, you took my reserves away. Like you stole from the pantry. How am I going to bud out in the spring? But if you wait until spring, when it takes all that energy out of the pantry and puts it up and to start creating buds, then you cut off roots and it goes, I don't miss it. You know, I already moved everything out of the pantry. I put it up into the house. So that's the ideal time, is when buds start to swell on a deciduous tree. You can hack the roots back to very minimal amount of feeder roots and change the pot, change the shoes. The tree won't even notice. It won't notice that you moved it. Same thing with the tropical. They're pumping in the summer. If it's hot, humid, miserable to be outside, they say it's time to be repotted. You can rip every leaf off the tree. You can cut them down to a bare stump and stick them in the ground, and they will probably grow. So, but that's the kind of things that as you're doing it, you'll say, well, you look it up online and say, what says repotted in the spring? Again, it does for a deciduous tree, but if you try that with a juniper and it's late spring, it'll die here, because our spring is different than New York spring, different than California spring. It's very regional. So it helped me quite a bit getting involved with the club here, just because I could learn, well, how do I do it in Florida? Because I grew up in Illinois and everything has moved up about 2 months. So I talked to my grandfather about gardening, and I'd be like, it's March, I think I got to put my garden in. He's like, I don't put my garden in until Mother's Day. Well, again, we're 1,000 miles away from each other, so that worked. But when I put my garden in on Mother's Day, it all died. So, but that's what Grandpa said. He said, put it in on Mother's Day. So same thing with bonsai. It's just learning your region for learning what happens. So there's the added complications like everything else, insects, diseases, all that. They'll hit weakened trees. If you learn to keep your trees healthy, they don't need a lot of extra care. I do monitor them. I'll walk through my garden every morning. I have overhead irrigation, it waters it, but I'll walk and check them. So that's, my son now harasses me every morning. He's like, did you go look at your trees yet? Did you look at your trees yet? He's 12. He's really obnoxious at times, but he's me. So yeah, I'm like, no, I haven't gone to look at my trees yet. That's why I don't have my shoes on. But so I walk through and it's just a quick lap. I look at everything, kind of look for, did my sprinkler break? Is there any kind of bug problems? Make mental notes to myself or take notes on my phone. I come home from work, I'll address them. So it's just attention, just saying I'm gonna check it, know what's going on. Like anything, if you get it early, it's very easy. As you get further like into a problem, it's harder to treat. You have to use harsher chemicals. You have to use more of them. It might have spread to other things on the benches. If you prefer to do more organic methods, then it's easier to catch things early on. So, yeah, and then we do have a club here locally. I think it was mentioned in the presentation before. I threw some brochures on the back table. We meet once a month in the Mandarin area at the Mandarin Garden Club rather than the Jacksonville Garden Club. Smaller than this. This one is absolutely lovely. So we do a different topic every month, and it's either a species specific or a technique specific thing. We also are trying to schedule beginner classes. So that's looking like it'll be the end of summer. So we'll take, and I should have brought it, but we'll grab a tree that is very durable and can tolerate mistakes. And you'll go into a class and say, okay, well, I'm going to get a tree, have a more robust education than what we did tonight, probably like a 2-hour background of, hey, what is bonsai? How do I care for it? What do I encounter? Then in this, you'll come back another night and you'll repot the tree, and then come back the third time and style and wire the tree. And then you'll go home and say, okay, well, now I have a bonsai tree and I have my own. And I've also met people from the club that can then help me keep it alive. We had a very nice lady come. She probably hates that I use her as an example, but she came about 6 months after a class. She handed me back my bonsai tree and says, this isn't for me. Tree looked fine. And I said, no, you're doing fine. It looks good. It's healthy. You're doing nothing wrong. She goes, no, I've almost killed this tree. I'm like, it looks fine. I'm like, it's a little bit sparse, but it looks fine. She's like, it lost its leaves. I'm like, yeah, they'll do that sometimes. It'll defoliate. Means it's pouting. Just keep it watered. You'll be fine. She's like, I did that 3 times. In 6 months, the tree had fully defoliated itself 3 times and was still alive. I do not know how, because she was right. She had almost killed that tree, but it looked fine. Now, South Florida, on a super healthy tree, can they get away with defoliating it 3 times? Yes, but it's pushing it. They don't do it in 6 months. So those are the kind of trees that we try and pick for the class because it'll tolerate the mistakes. I did not think it could tolerate that level of mistake, but we had a good tree, and so then she gave it back and said it wasn't for her. And at that point, I'm like, we'll help you, we'll teach you, but I get it. So, so yeah, that's our normal introduction. That's how I got introduced to the club, as I went and took a beginner class and said, this is really cool, and kept doing it. My wife to this day hates it that she got me started. She was a zookeeper and a horticulture manager at the zoo, brought in a little maple tree in a pot. And she said, you got to meet Ed. He had this maple tree, looks like a little tree in a pot. It's amazing. I met Ed. Ed did a beginner workshop. Guess where I got my first tree? From her. And then we get to 200. And so as long as they don't come in the house, I am okay. But that's the one rule. I can have a greenhouse. I can do whatever I want in the yard. They do not come in the doors. So again, my kids will harass me. If I bring them in football season and I'm wiring and working on something, watching a game, like, did mom approve that? Did she tell you to bring it in? I'm like, yes, she did. Thank you. Yes, so that's my children. So yeah, and I think I've covered the next slide, but yeah, so there's our information. It's North Florida Bonsai. It's not too hard to remember. I included my email in the presentation. You are welcome to reach out to me. My email is also on the website as well as a phone number. So if anybody has questions or has trees now that they're like, hey, something's going wrong, either pull me aside here or give me a call. I'm happy to talk tiny trees. This is much more fun than talking about numbers or other things than that. So that's what I got. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
If you don't mind, would you mind going to the microphone and asking it on? Yeah, I'll bring it to you then.
How do you know what wire to use for the trees?
So like everything, they make specialized tool and specialized wire. You don't have to use it. There's an aluminum wire, which I should have left the piece on here so I could show you. Just a small black wire. It looks like anything else. They also make copper wire. There are plenty of people that will just go buy wire from the hardware store, like phone wire, telephone wire, strip the plastic on it and use that. The benefit to the bonsai wire is it's already gauged in size. So I can say, oh, a 2.0 is what I need, 2 millimeters is what I need, piece of aluminum, and I know consistently how it's going to work.
I didn't know if you got it too thin, if it would not hold it down,
Yeah.
or if you got it too thick, if it would break the branch. or-
Yeah, exactly. So what I do is I'll take a piece of wire about 1 inch long and I'll push it against the branch. I'll hold it out with my finger and push it against the branch. If the branch moves and the wire doesn't, then that wire is strong enough to move the branch. If I do like this and the wire bends and the branch doesn't, then the wire is too small. So then I'll go up a half size and try it again. There's no benefit or there's no detriment to using bigger wire. It's just harder to handle. Like I said, you can do more damage that way. And it's just more to manipulate. I'd rather use the smallest piece of wire I can because then you won't see it and it's easier. You can even, if you only have small wire, you can put 2 pieces of wire on and it won't quite equal 1 big piece, but it'll do the same thing. As long as it's functional and it moves the branch, that's all you care about.
Okay. Now, if you were trying to grow a bonsai tree around a rock,
Mhm.
do you trim the roots around it and just leave certain roots, maybe the bigger ones, to grow?
I did select. So I said, hey, I'm going to take 4, 5, 6 and place them where I wanted them on the rocks. And then I packed them with sphagnum moss, which is like an orchid moss to keep the moisture high, wrapped it in saran wrap to hold it tight, and then I taped it to hold it tight. And then I left everything growing below and above. So I want the tree to at that point put on as much green as it can, because the more photosynthesis it does, the more it's going to thicken the trunk, the more it's going to thicken those roots. So I've just placed the, excuse me, I've just placed them around the rock at that point. So I want them to swell and get bigger. The hard thing is you have to leave it covered and underground. So there's all this cool stuff happening that you can't see, and then you dig it out and go, oh, it looks really neat, and I want to expose it. The detriment to that is roots grow in darkness. So if you pull it out, it's going to still swell because it's going to become part of the trunk, but not as much as if it was in the ground and still a root. So the quicker you expose it, the more you can enjoy it, but the slower it's going to grow. So, or slower it's going to thicken. So it's that trade-off of sometimes you're just like, I can't wait anymore. It's been 4 years and I want to see something besides a tree in a pot on the ground. And I am not a patient person. Everybody, my coworkers who are asking me today, they're like, you must be really patient. I'm like, I am not patient. I'm very impatient. My in-laws will attest to it. But this is me trying to be patient. So
Yeah, definitely
When I
comes
raised
to
my
mind
hand
as
and said I
patience,
had
grasshopper,
bonsai,
you know?
I literally bought them about 5 days ago from Lowe's.
yeah,
So very new.
no, that's perfect.
Okay.
And there is a love-hate relationship with the big box store. The tropicals I love because they are good trees for beginners. The junipers, not so much. And they sometimes come half dead because they brought them inside and they did all the things wrong and then they sell them to someone. And it's the Christmas tree effect of they brought a juniper, they shipped it in a box, 1,000 miles, put it in the store shelf inside. Still green, looks great, it's dead. You know, it's a Christmas tree, you cut it down, bring it in your house for a month and water it, and it's dead. You cut it off, you know it's dead, but it's green. Same thing with the juniper, it's green, you bring it home, and like 2 days later, you're like, it's getting brown. I'm like, yeah, because it was dead when you bought it. So you're not setting up people for success. But the tropical trees that they sell, like the ficus, the Fukian teas, those are what I started with. I mean, they grow well, they do well in our climate, and they're good trees.
Mine seem to be doing really well. However, one of them wiggles in the tray.
Yeah,
And I didn't know if that was a possible,
yeah,
future.
it will be a problem, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's hard to see, you can kind of catch a glint of it maybe in the light. There's a piece of wire here. All my trees are tied into the pot. So they don't move at all. So these wires across, they're all tied in. I cut the tap roots off. So a tree in nature would be held down by its tap root. These don't have that. So to mimic the tap root, I wire them to the bottom of the pot. So they're all in one piece. Every time it moves in the pot, the tree's trying to start, sorry, the tree is trying to create roots and little hair roots. Every time you move it, you're breaking those feeder roots. So it can't grow. So every time it's trying to grow new roots, then you break them off. And you grow new roots and break them off. So the more stationary you can keep trees, the better. You can come afterwards and put wire like up through the drain holes in the bottom and tie it in. You can do it with wire. You can do it with, honestly, you can do it like bread ties, anything that string really, anything that'll stretch and come through, you can just tie it in place. Sometimes you can just repack the soil and kind of readjust it, or put a rock there and hold it until it's time to repot it. There's a lot of things. It's not going to kill it. It just won't thrive and be fully everything you want if it's moving around.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think you've maybe covered this, but we do have a question on Zoom that asks, what's the easiest plant for beginners?
So my two personal favorites are ficus and Chinese elm. So you get both pieces. So this is a species of ficus. It's Ficus narrofolia, narrow leaf ficus or willow leaf ficus. This is what we normally use for beginner classes, was a ficus. So because they're tropical, they hold a lot of latent energy, they can take a lot of abuse, and they can bounce back quickly to it. And they'll also tell you, so if it's not watered well, the leaves will be droopy, and I can go immediately see and say, something's wrong. Oh, you need water, I like elms for the same reason. They're very durable. If you go to certain parts of town, they're planted as street trees. So the most aggressive part of our town is like right on the side of the street. Either cars are going to hit them, it's just hot off that asphalt, they don't get irrigated. They plant them there, they still thrive. So those are another good one. They're well acclimated to our climate. They'll show you what's wrong with them, and they grow like weeds. So I like things that grow fast and grow a lot, because that gives me a lot to work with. I don't really recommend like invasive trees, but there are some invasive trees like privets that people will use as bonsai trees. You can see why, because when you try and set air layers or stuff, they'll grow roots out of everywhere. They'll kind of, they go nuts. There's a reason they're invasive, but so they make good trees, but not like a recommendation.
We also have a question about, is there a place where you can take a tour of bonsais?
Yes, so there's a couple public gardens. Unfortunately, none of them are super close. We were talking earlier about Conyers, the Bonsai Monastery, which is up near Atlanta. So if you ever fly in and out and actually stop in Atlanta, it's not too far from the Atlanta airport. It's just called the monastery. It is a working monastery. One of the brothers there at the monastery took up bonsai. I'm trying to think what they said. I think it was 50s, 60s. He started with the Kingsville Boxwood. It is the slowest growing boxwood, and boxwood already grow slow. The thing is 3 feet tall, beautifully ramified. It is a gorgeous tree. That is their primary tree in the collection. They have pots, they have trees, they have everything. That's one of the like historic public gardens in the Southeast. There's a more recent one in Port St. Lucie, Heathcote, sorry, we looked up beforehand. So the Heathcote Gardens in Port St. Lucie, one of the grandfathers of Florida bonsai, when he was getting on in years and couldn't take care of his trees, he donated a large portion of his collection to the Heathcote Gardens to set up one of the first bonsai gardens here in Florida, like public gardens. So that's one focuses mainly on tropical trees and trees that he really introduced to the art of bonsai. Like Ficus narrofolia didn't exist as a bonsai tree. There's debate whether it actually existed as a tree at all until Jim Smith introduced it. So this is a sport, or is suspected to be a sport off a different variety of ficus that he found in a nursery and said, I like that leaf shape. So he propagated it, grew it. People go to his nursery and go, I like that. They propagated the heck out of them. So these all exist as a, you know, a progeny of his original tree that he found. So we like dwarfs and sports and weird trees just because they give, you know, kind of unique genetics. So those are two from a public gardens. From a private gardens, there are multiple members like myself who have way too many trees. You're welcome to get in contact with me, come walk through the garden, ask questions. I do not mind. I welcome it. Just note that it's not always like all weeded and pretty and everything like a public garden, but I do my best. So these trees didn't look this way yesterday. My daughter helped me go collect moss off the ground and we mossed all the soil surface and made everything look pretty and presentable. Other than that, you would have seen fertilizer bags and you would have seen rough, just the trees look the same. I didn't really prune them, but the soil surface doesn't look as pretty and finished. But this is more of a Japanese aesthetic with the moss on the top. It looks very finished and clean. They don't want to bring dirt into the house. So in order to hide the dirt and soil surface, you add a layer of living moss. It also works well artistically because it looks like grass. So grass in a tree puts it in perspective.
We have a couple more questions on Zoom. Where's the best place to find containers?
Ooh. Well, so if you're like me and you're way too into it, then I'd say the internet, because you can get handmade containers, and like both these were, you know, you get to the point where you want a specific size and color and shape, and you can't buy that. So you have to have someone make it for you, and you're way off the deep end. So that's both of these containers. If you just want a standard, hey, I need a rectangle, an oval, I don't really care about the shape and size. There are a couple nurseries in town that carry a few. A lot of Ace Hardwares will have a very small section. There is, I'm blanking on the name, Plant Ranch on Beach Boulevard as you're going out to the beaches right before the Intercoastal. They have a pretty large selection really for just not a bonsai specific nursery. And they've got a couple tables, quite a few different sizes, shapes, all very reasonably priced. It's a good place to go get just any kind of ceramic and say, hey, I want to spend $10. I want to make it look nice. And you know, you can make a selection.
And then what about jade plants as bonsai?
Yes. So if you ask the internet, they'll say no, but there are beautiful jades. So people poo-poo certain plants and say, hey, one of the things we started with was it needs a hard woody stem. True jades, I would say no. They have dwarf jades, Horticulture afra, also called like an elephant bush. They have a smaller leaf. They're still a succulent. Those make wonderful bonsai. That's one of the ones I mentioned, Jim Smith earlier, one of the ones he popularized as bonsai trees. Again, people like poo-pooed it and said, it's a succulent, it's not a hard stem. It would never get away at a Japanese show. They would not show it because it's not part of their national heritage and culture because it doesn't grow there. But now you go to South Africa, they grow there and they put them in shows and we put them in shows because they're not part of our climate, but they're subtropical trees. They grow wonderfully here. And the added benefit is the leaves taste like green apple. So when you prune them, you can just snack on them or feed them to your pet tortoise. So
That's wonderful. Yeah, and Brenda Daly, one of our Garden Club members who's on the Zoom, said Ace Hardware at the beach on Atlantic Boulevard is a good place.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah.
We have a question back here.
I don't want to start controversy, but can you talk about soil composition and especially how does someone like us with an addiction can actually afford it? You know,
Yes.
Do you buy in bulk or?
Yes. So you're obviously in it enough if you know that that's the main, again, one of your big internet debates is what's the right soil. So it's based on climate. You will hear the fancy Japanese dirt, the akadama, which is a high fired clay. That's what a lot of people will tout. It doesn't do fantastic in Florida. It's very wet and humid. That clay breaks down very quickly. And it's quite frankly very expensive to import dirt from Japan. So not my recommendation. Our club mixes third parts, lava, sifted pine bark, which is like small, like eraser-sized pieces, and a high-fired clay. We sometimes will use turfus. We sometimes will use a different product. We just want it all equal particle size, about a 1/4 to 3/4 inch particle size, and it's a very loose aggregate. So if you see the pots in the back, that's what it is. It's basically, so 2 of the 3 parts are inorganic. The pine bark is only there to hold nutrients and a little bit extra moisture because it gets so hot here. So those are what we find works well here. That's kind of the standard mix that I use for almost everything. I will sometimes sub out the turfus or the high fired clay for pumice if I can find it. I like it a little bit better, but it's hard to find. So those, because like you mentioned, you either have to source them all yourself or buy them online and pay the shipping. So as a club, we started saying we need to make this available. So we mix it by the 5-gallon bucket. We do it about twice a year. We mix about 50 buckets at a time and then make it available to members. So it's about $25 for a 5-gallon bucket. If you have a normal size collection, a 5-gallon bucket can go a long way. I go through about 25-gallon buckets a year because I have an excessive amount of trees. So I do mix my own, but I just buy the components when the club goes and buys them, and we drive a trailer down to South Florida and buy stuff. And then, you know, we stop at nurseries and buy beginner workshop trees. We make it worth the time. So. But does that answer your question a little bit?
All right, any other? Oh,
Yes,
we have a
ma'am.
question up front.
Oh,
here.
sorry, he's gonna ring you, Mike.
How much does it cost to make a bonsai with all the tools included?
So it varies. So it depends. If you want to get started, you can start it relatively inexpensive and say, I'm going to go to, you know, Lowe's or Home Depot, buy a tree for say $20, and then I could go to an Ace Hardware and buy a nice pot for about the same. And then you don't need specialized tools. So they make it because it's a hobby, and you need all your fancy stuff to go with your hobby, like your 3 sets of golf clubs that you don't use. So they make fancy scissors. You can go get kitchens that just get a really sharp pair of scissors, a pair of pliers, and then sometimes you'll need a heavier pruner. So like a bypass pruner, a nice one will work fine. You can buy like a concave cutter is really the only true bonsai tool that you'd need. And one of those you can get for like $25. You can buy a whole tool roll, and they've got, you know, Amazon's your friend. They have all kinds of beginner tools, and you can buy a full set. But I don't normally recommend that when people start out, because they want to say, I'd rather you spend the money on the trees and enjoy them and just use a basic pair of scissors and pliers and wire cutters that, you know, either you already have or maybe your dad already has in the garage, and you just acquire and say, these are mine now, and then go from there. But yeah, you can be like a friend of mine in Orlando, and he just decided he wanted to start and he didn't want to wait. So he went all over Florida and bought the most expensive trees he could find, but he had the money. And so he decided that's what he's going to do. He has now established one of the best private gardens in the state because he's bought hundreds of trees from top artists throughout the country or throughout the state. So he's on the far end this way, and you can go the far end this way or anywhere in between. So there was a very popular YouTube video that a man named Bjornholm, he studied in Japan, and he went over and filmed a lot of his journey while he was apprenticing. And so he showed a tree that he was working on that was a national treasure tree in Japan. That tree was valued at over $250,000 for the tree. None of mine are not that. They're not that. So that comes with the quality of the tree as well as the history. It's like we have trees in Washington, D.C. that were donated from Japan that made it through the bombings in World War II. So they have documentation that they were there at a nursery and survived the bombings, and then were provided to the U.S. as a gift of peace that started our national collection. So those have a lot of provenance, are basically priceless artifacts to our country, and would add to their value if they ever sold them. So, but if someone said, "Oh, that's Josh's tree," they'd be like, "Who's Josh?" Like, that's fine. You know, it's a pretty tree, but who's Josh? So, what other questions do you have?
Have you ever made a monster jade bonsai for the jade plant?
What was the first, Monster Jade?
That's a jade plant species.
I haven't. I don't know that tree. You have to show me a picture of it and we'll see if we can do it. I don't know. So, but most things, you probably could. I haven't done it though. No. You have any other questions for anybody else? Okay.
We do have a question on Zoom. Are there other trees on display? Could the camera show them? Oh, okay.
yeah.
But yeah, they're in the back and we'll take some pictures of them tonight and put them on the blog
Yeah.
so that everybody can enjoy them, but we can't get them on camera tonight. Thank you though.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. I was having to log them across the parking lot. So I was trying to minimize how many trips I had to take.
That's right. Any other questions in the audience? All right, do you have some final words of wisdom for us?
No, I mean, just my biggest encouragement is just give it a try. Don't be afraid. Again, everyone kills trees from the beginner to the Japanese master. Everyone's going to make a mistake. That's part of learning. As long as you learn from it, just keep going. So that's all I have.
Oh, we do have one more question. Best place to buy bonsais? North Florida Bonsai Club?
Well, there are a lot of members like myself who have way too many trees and do sell them. It's not as many. The biggest upcoming opportunity is if anyone is interested, the state sponsors a statewide convention over Memorial Day weekend. It's every Memorial Day in Orlando. It'll be it's at the Florida Mall. So my daughter likes to go because she can go to the American Girl store while I go look at bonsai trees. But so you go to the Florida Mall, the parts of the convention cost. So if you wanted to go in a workshop or a demo, you'd have to pay. If you want to walk through the vendor exhibit, or if you want to walk through the vendor area or the exhibition of all the trees that they've selected that are on display, both of those are free. So that's a great opportunity as people are saying, hey, I might want to do this. I want to go see basically 50 trees that were selected as the top in the state for this year on display, a variety of species and types. I can walk through there as many times as I want. And then I can go to the vendor area and say, I really like this tree. Do you have one of those? And they buy pots, tools, trees, everything. Normally very reasonably priced. There are some more expensive, but there's some very inexpensive too. The only downside is you have to drive to Orlando, but that's a tough sell with my wife who loves Disney and my kids who like to buy stuff. So it's really hard to say, let's go to Orlando every Memorial Day. So
Yeah.
yes, ma'am. Okay, I hope I know.
Anybody know what the word bonsai means?
Tree in a tray is technically.
What Latin little tree is.
Really? The Latin? Very good.
By any chance, will you be back at the Art in the Garden Festival at the zoo?
Yes, we will. We should be there both days. So our upcoming events for the club. So next Monday, so May 9th will be our next meeting down in Mandarin. Then on the 19th, we're going to be sponsoring an event with the Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp. So we're going to do what they're calling fanscaping. And they're going to pull fans out of the audience. We're going to style trees and then be voted on by round of applause at the fairground, at the I can't think of the name, the stadium. So that's going to be the 19th, and then the 21st and 22nd, I
That's
believe
right.
it is. We'll be at the Art in the Garden Festival, so we'll have more members there.
At the Jacksonville Zoo and Gardens.
Yes. So then there'll probably be trees on there will definitely be trees on display. There might be trees for sale as well as information, or you can just meet other members from the club.
All right, well, could we get a big round of applause for Josh?
Well, thank you.
And I have a couple of parting thoughts to share with you before we take off. We have our Budding Gardeners program coming up. It's a celebration of Mother's Day, the Saturday afterward. So this is a gift you can give to mom. Don't get her stuff, get her an activity and a fun thing to do with the whole family. So this is learning about monarch butterflies and the important role that they play in our world and in your garden. That is May 14th, that's 10 a.m. and tickets are available. They're free for members and just $5 for non-members. So it's a great opportunity to come and have a fun time. Our annual meeting of the Garden Club for our anniversary year is on May 19th. It's a Thursday at 4 p.m. Come learn about the Garden Club and what we've accomplished over the last year and our plans for the future. And we have our Fun with Flowers program. If you've never done Fun with Flowers, it's really fun. And this is a great Mother's Day related event. You can give it to your mom or the mom in your life. It's on May 12th, so it's the Thursday after Mother's Day. And there's a morning class at 10 a.m. and an evening class at 6:30 p.m. It's Joyful Bouquets with Crystal Joy, who owns a company called The Joy of Floral. You'll often see them at RAM. And she's going to be kind of getting your inner artist to come out in the bouquets that you will learn how to make, and then you'll make your own and take it home with you. So what a fun activity to do. And then we have another one coming up in July 14th, and you'll learn the French technique of designing flowers. And this is with Samantha Wilson of the St. John's Flower Market, who has done a lot of schooling in this area and has learned a lot of these beautiful French techniques. We have a survey that we would love you to take. We really want to hear your feedback about this program and get your ideas for future programs. So please take our survey. You can either scan this code if you're at home on Zoom. We have one at the check-in table, and we'll send it to you after the program as well to get your feedback. So please take the survey. We really need your feedback. Once again, I want to thank the Jessie Ball DuPont Fund for making programs like this possible. And I want to thank all of you for being here and making this program the joy it is. And we couldn't do this without you because, well, we could, but we'd just be talking to ourselves, and that's really not much fun. So thank you to all of you. Thanks to Daniel, and thanks once again, Josh. Everybody have a great evening. Goodbye.